Hi, this is Robert Green. I'm the host of Visual Studio Toolbox. I've been doing this show for quite some time. The first episode that I have up on the screen here was May 2011, and we're on pretty close to our 150th show. And I've done all of them myself with one exception. Seth Juarez once came on and co-hosted. That worked fine. And I decided recently that, yes, I'm obviously going to continue doing the show, but that I would let some others have some of the fun. And so I've decided to ask a few people to co-host the show every now and again. Dimitri Leyland, who's going to do the episode you're going to see next, is going to do a bunch of episodes. Donovan Brown's going to do some of the ALM and DevOps stuff. And we'll see who else may show up as a co-host in the future. So just to let you know that the show goes on, I'll still be the main host. I'll still be doing most of them, but we're going to have some additional co-hosts, and I'm really looking forward to that. So today's episode will be Dimitri Leyland as the co-host, and I will see you next time on Visual Studio Toolbox.
Hey, and welcome to an episode of Visual Studio Toolbox. My name is Dimitri Leyland, and as Robert announced me a second ago, I'm going to be a co-host in future episodes, starting with this one. And I'm really excited to have Kevin Conan with me from the SQL Server team. Hey, Kevin.
Hi.
Welcome to Toolbox.
Thanks very much.
We've been working for a while together, and we've been talking about this video. It's awesome. We're finally here. So what are we going to talk about today?
Yeah, so today we're going to talk about using SQL Server data tools in Visual Studio to make it easier to develop your applications that interact with databases.
Okay, and specifically SQL Server, right? I mean,
Yes.
That's the scope. I remember doing evangelism for these tools. I'm familiar with them for a long time. And a question I'd often get is, does SQL Server data tools work with like Oracle or MySQL or something else? Well, it's for our product, right?
Yes.
So that's the first thing to say. And it's free, right? A lot of people think another thing we have to get through some SKU of some Visual Studio thing, right?
Yeah.
This thing's available to everybody, right?
That's right. It's 100% free. It's built into Visual Studio ever since Visual Studio 2012. And with Visual Studio 2015, obviously we've added a lot of new improvements and features that work great there.
Yeah, and you guys ship all the time, right? This is something that's really a live project. We're not talking about something we shipped for developers like a long time ago or anything like that. This has been around for how many years?
Yeah, it's been around a while, but it's now shipping monthly, not even every 3 months, but monthly updates. So our current release, I'm actually going to show you what's coming out in about a week or so.
Awesome.
And like that, new features added in. I can point those out if you want, but every month come back and check and you'll see some new things.
Yeah, and I had to look down. It's October 24th, so a week from October 24th. Because when publishing the video, folks might already have access to what you just
That's right.
just
So
showed
so by the time this goes live, it should be up and ready, release 16.5.
Okay, awesome. Well, let's get into it. We've got a lot to cover, and why don't you kick us off?
Great. Okay, so first I just wanted to give some context, so a couple of quick slides here. And I want to talk to you about what a lot of people see when they're used to developing, right? Which is you do your application in source control, everything's well managed, but often in a real environment, the database development is kept separate. Sometimes it's a different team, a DBA manages it, and when they're doing that, it's often not checked into source control. Usually they'll have a set of...
That never happens.
Never happens.
We never not checking something to source control.
Yeah, never happens. Often you end up developing directly against stage or sometimes even production. You make your changes right there, you hope and...
There's like a data person on the team, like a DBA or the database guy or the staging server person. They often, how many times have I had this in my career, right? They manage the staging environment. If somebody needs to deploy some SQL, they deploy it there.
Yeah.
You come in the next day, your code isn't working unless you get latest or something. It's always been kind of messy, so this helps with that.
Yeah, and it's hard then to track your changes, know when things are going to happen.
Right.
It gets disconnected, so it slows down your development. There's a lot of issues with this. And that's where a lot of people are there today, and we want to move them away from that. There's some clear issues there. I mean, you don't know what's going to work against production. You might not be able to see all of the things that are in your database and see when things break. Because with application code, you compile, you get a lot of helpful information from that.
Spoiled Visual Studio developers, like myself, we want to see all the things that build time, right, as much as possible they can be caught. And we like to have everything checked in, part of the solution, and get latest and start working in the morning as a developer, right? Those are the things that most of us take for granted for everything else except often SQL, right?
Yeah.
SQL becomes that one thing, and this is the solution for that.
Yeah, that's right. And so I wanted to go through what we think would be very useful for you and what SQL Server Data Tools provides. So when you're looking for a better approach than this, what you want to look at for key features improving productivity are being source control friendly, just like your application, being a repeatable process. So multiple times you should be able to roll this out, because that's really critical, and most enterprises will want to have that kind of staging verification process.
Nothing like missing some column on a table or having the wrong data type, just because things weren't as organized in your project, right?
Yeah, and especially the deployment part is very important, because it might be there in your local database, but if the script doesn't have it, then it's all missing and you're in trouble.
Your staging may break, or eventually, even worse, your project will break.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Continuous integration and deployment is great. So whenever you check in, you should be able to run a deployment, make sure it all works, ideally run some tests against it, and do all of that goodness as well, just like you would for your application.
And the reason why that works is because SSDT, this tool, right, by having it installed in Visual Studio, brings T-SQL into your solution. It's a project in your solution, it's part of it. And that's one of the biggest things that we're trying to help folks with. I think, again, having that disconnect, having SQL be something else has always been a pain. But this is right there.
That's right, that's right. And then one of the great things SQL Server Data Tools does is makes it very easy to find out about your code, fix errors, discover what's wrong, which can be very difficult sometimes with SQL.
Yeah.
And understanding the impact of your changes is another really good one. And we're going to mention briefly alternatives to SQL Server Data Tools in the next slide. Things like understanding the impact of changes using Schema Compare, which we'll show later. They're great for anybody who's developing with SQL, even if they don't use the SQL projects that we're going to show.
Okay, awesome.
Okay, so moving on, there are two main solutions. So one is the SQL projects that we're going to talk about. That's where you have everything in T-SQL, it's source controlled, and it's a project-based solution. A common alternative is a migration framework like Entity Framework Migrations.
Right.
So you can use SQL Server Data Tools with Entity Framework. We're going to show that today. But the migrations framework, what it does is it takes a set of changes. So for every time you want to update the data part of your application, you would write a new migration that goes from one state to the other. So that's a great technique to do similar things to SQL Server Data Tools. Clearly, I'm a little biased and think that you should try out SQL Server Data Tools.
You don't work in the EF team. You're the SSDT team. But they're both valid paths, right?
That's right.
And complementary in many ways.
Exactly. And if you're already using a migration framework approach, you may well want to stick with that, but use some of the complementary tools that we're providing.
Yeah, I think, as a baseline for SSDT, what I always talk to customers, myself, I use SSDT for my side projects. It's the number one thing is T-SQL is right there with me. It deploys with me. It's part of my build process, part of my CI process. Other things, how you get from T-SQL version 1 to version 2 in some environment, that's a whole different conversation.
Yeah, and the other thing that we've seen with SQL projects that's great is oftentimes people start with very app-centric code, and as their applications scale up, grow bigger, they want to make it faster, more performant. They start putting a lot more logic into the database level. Yeah. That's where something like migrations
and improving queries and everything else takes some effort, unfortunately.
And that's where you get the real benefits from SQL projects, because you'll start to understand a lot more and make it a lot easier and more productive to develop your stored procedures, your views, all of your programmability objects there. Okay.
Awesome.
So that's the background for why we want people to try out SQL Server Data Tools.
Awesome.
We hope they will.
Yeah.
And now we'd like to demo it, if that's possible.
Let's jump in. We love demos and toolbox.
Great. Okay, so I've actually taken an application that you wrote a while back called healthclinic.biz.
I can't take the full credit. I wrote like 90%. No, I did not write this application. My team did, though, so that is correct. We wrote it back for Connect last year, the developer fall moment that we have. It's available on GitHub, so you're just pulled down from GitHub and integrated into this.
Yeah, so I pulled it down from GitHub. Cool. This is an ASP.NET application backed by Entity Framework right now. And I'm going to go and take that and start using an SSDT project to do the SQL part of that.
Okay, awesome.
Okay,
let's go.
So just briefly to show you what this does, it's got a login page over here. If you're a user, you'll get some information. And the important part that we'll take note of, hopefully this works. Great, is you've got information about patients, about doctors, about all of these different concepts that are there. And one of the long scenario that we're going to do here is, right now it only works for doctors, but if you can imagine this business is expanding, it becomes multidisciplinary and adds in physical therapists and other type of professionals.
Time to change that database.
Time to change that database up. And this is a great time to come back to your app and start using SQL Server Data Tools for that part of it.
I think a lot of developers will admit that this is the one time in the project lifecycle where you always get a little bit nervous. You're like, changing code, that's easy. Changing database. Where's my DBA? What scripts, or who's using EF? What project technology we're using here? So yeah, I think this is awesome.
Okay, awesome. So going into Visual Studio, This is set up into a number of different projects. The important ones here are the web front end, which we'll look at. And if you look here, the one thing that we need to know from here is if we go to the app settings.json, this is going against a local DB instance locally. So you can obviously override this, but I created this local DB instance just to keep things nice and separated, and there's a database there.
Yeah, that makes sense, and it's worth saying for folks who are watching this, SSDT works with everything, right? Every version of SQL Server we can think of, whether it's Developer Edition, local DB, SQL DB in the cloud, right? You guys don't care. You work with SQL Server no matter where it's running.
That's right. And LocalDB is built in, it's installed with Visual Studio, so it's right there. We updated it in Update 2 to support SQL Server 2016. And so we've continued upgrading that, and we'll keep shipping SQL Server data tools with the latest versions whenever they come out.
And how far back does SSDT work with SQL Server?
2005. So for the database projects, it's SQL Server 2005. There are business intelligence projects, just to pitch that we've unified the installer for SQL Server data tools, so that if you do have business intelligence, just update SQL Server data tools from inside Visual Studio, you'll have the option to install those. And they are also backwards compatible, 2008 and up for analysis and reporting services, and 2012 and up for integration services.
All right, awesome.
Great. So the other part of this that's obviously interesting to us at the moment is the data project. So this
I would have guessed Office.
yeah, not quite.
Not
and
today.
I haven't explored the wonders of that, so I'm sure you have it in another
It's a cool demo. We built a lot into it, but I'm glad we found the SQL piece for this demo.
Yeah, so in here you can see that each table has its own repository here. So this is a doctor's repository. It's done in the entity framework way. It's lovely, plain old C# objects, and it's got a whole bunch of information there. But for me, it is actually kind of hard to understand exactly how this maps to a database. So what I actually want to do is go and view the data part of this from a database and pull it into a project system. So that's what we're going to do next. So I'm going to stop this demo app for the moment so that I can just get a little bit more source control. And if you haven't started with SQL Server Data Tools before, one of the things is you might be using Server Explorer to connect straight to your databases. We'd recommend you use SQL Server Object Explorer here. So we power the functionality in Server Explorer. It's just a little more limited and doesn't have all the options.
Right, the SQL Server Object Explorer is more specific to SQL Server, has more functionality. You install SSDT, it's right there in your view options. Might as well use it.
Exactly. So going here, and you can see that I've already connected to this server, and the database is ready to go over here. It's been populated with some sample data as part of the app, which is all great. And I could right-click here and create the new project, but since I just want to organize it correctly, I'm going to create a project first and pull in the schema of that database to understand what it looks like.
Yeah, and this is already, we're talking about SSDT project, right? So this is a solution does not have SSDT project in it. We're going to add one.
That's right.
Yeah, and there's two ways, right? You can add it manually first on the right side, or you can go from the left side to the right side.
Exactly, exactly. Cool. So let's do that, and if we just go to Add and New Project, we go and we'll get a SQL Server one here. I'm just going to make sure that this is under the source folder, and I will call this, to be consistent, myhealth.data.SQL, since it's our SQL project. Okay, so this has created a blank SQL project. Things to note when you create this for the first time, if you open the properties, you set a target platform here. So this is quite important. This is how we validate that all of the syntax and code that you're using
This is your build validation.
Exactly. Yeah. So this is where build validation comes from. You can see all of the versions listed here. This is classic Azure SQL database. Obviously with V12, huge new surface area, and that's the default. That will eventually go away, but for now, again, for compatibility reasons, we'll keep it in. But yes, we're using SQL Server 2016 locally, so we'll leave it at that. And we're going to import the schema data in. So if we just go import, you can import a bag of scripts if you have your code like that. If in those scenarios you were running and you had everything managed. It won't pull in alter scripts, just creates, and we'll go over that in a minute. And a DAC pack is just when you do a build, just like you get a DLL, for SQL projects you get a DAC pack, which is just the single file containing all of your schema information for you.
And it's the thing you can hand over in a scenario where you don't have access to, let's say, production or some Q&A environment. You can hand over the DAC pack. that team could deploy it, and you can be sure that if they deploy the backpack, your SQL changes made it out to the environment.
That's right, yes. And that gets checked into, that gets as part of the build. You can publish it, then you can pull down as part of a release flow. And we've actually got blogs on doing that for Visual Studio Online, which is great.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I remember even a few years ago when I was still in the field at Microsoft, I would run into customers that didn't know about that part of it or the tools. This is really powerful stuff. We could spend time just on that little thing, but let's keep moving.
But for now, just pulling in the database. So we want to pull in all of the data. So I'm just going to choose the connection. I have actually connected this before, so it's in my recent history. But if I hadn't, if you go to the browse over here, and all of your local servers get helpfully listed. So I'm just going to go down and pick my health from there, connect, and start.
Yes, so there's a lot of options, right? We don't have time to talk about all the import options, all the build validation options, things you can configure based on your project needs, so folks shouldn't feel like we have some special need and this thing won't work for me. Check it out, maybe it will, right?
Yeah, there's a huge amount of configuration. Obviously, we won't go into all of it today, but pretty much everything is configurable or extensible.
Cool, so what are we showing here?
Okay, so now that this is finished, you'll notice that a folder has been added, and underneath it are all of our tables. So it is a simple application. It's just a set of tables right now. You can see, for example, we showed the doctor before. If you go in here, and I'll just minimize this to give this room.
Real estate.
You can see that since it's a table, we have a very good designer, makes it very easy to make changes up here, and any changes are reflected in the SQL code. So if it's not in the designer, you can easily just type the SQL to make it all work, which is great.
I remember like really kind of rediscovering this for the first time in my side project I was working on, and this was so awesome. Like I'm seeing this and like, oh man, I want to talk about all this cool stuff in the editor that we have. So maybe you can describe some of the capabilities of this view, because this view itself is worth a show, right?
Yeah, it really is. And even some people use SQL Server Management Studio, and if they love the table designer there, this is that on steroids. It's a better version, it's more modern, it's great. All of the columns are listed one by one up here. You can change data types as you need.
And it's highlighting down here the actual T-SQL as you move to the
That's right, it's moving in. You can check a lot of the settings. Your keys, your indexes, your constraints are all shown up here. Again, clicking on it brings us right to the primary key down here, which is great. And you can bootstrap adding in new keys, adding in indexes, etc. right from here. One of the things people might not know is that the properties window down here also has configuration. We're not going to really go into that in detail today, but you can alter a lot of the settings right from there. So again, if you don't know T-SQL, this is a very comfortable, safe environment to kind of learn and develop, especially with the table needs.
Yeah, it works for all sorts of people's level of exposure to SQL Server, and it does the validation for you. If you like break some T-SQL down there in editor, you can edit this, right?
Yeah,
so you can
for
take
sure.
away a comma and
or a great one actually to show you is what happens if I reference something that doesn't exist.
Right.
Because that's a great one, and it comes up red and tells you this foreign key has an unresolved reference. So it says this thing doesn't exist, it's broken.
Yeah, as long as it's part of this project in the solution, this will find it, this will validate it.
Yep, exactly. And
Awesome.
just to show what happens if you try and build this, which as we mentioned building before, building will do all the validation that you'd expect, and now that there's an error here, it will say build failed, brings up the error list with this. If I double click, it brings me straight to where the error is, which is really great. Makes it very simple to fix things as you go. And what you'll usually find is if you're renaming things, if you're changing the structure, that will happen a lot. And you'll get errors or warnings in some cases that tell you, hey, there's a problem here. And T-SQL as a language is very tolerant. So if you do that on the database side, it'll happily change the table, break the view, break the stored procedure, and you'll never notice.
If you've worked with SQL, you've been there.
It's
not a new scenario.
So obviously we'll want to revert this back for now. And the other part to show is that since we know now, and let's just verify that this does build. Since it does build, we're going to check this into source control. So as we mentioned, the great thing then is you get all of your history, all of your change log, all put in just like your application. And as you make changes, they can run in combination together.
Yeah, awesome.
Okay, so let's go over to Team Explorer. And
I've seen people use this in a way where they don't want the SQL building as part of their project, and that's fine. You can make a solution of your own or some variant that doesn't include this thing. It's an optional, but just having somebody manage this as part of their ALM lifecycle becomes very cool.
Yeah, exactly. And often what will happen is one person is still the developer, one or two, and the other people pull it down, and as part of their publish script, they just have it publish the database for them. So they're always in sync with the database developers instead of having some special mechanism to catch up with
And
them.
by special mechanism, you mean that email you have to check in the
Yeah,
morning
yeah.
with the SQL attached to it?
Exactly.
That has never happened to me.
No. So we'll just create a new branch for this, obviously, and create it. And we're going to go into our changes here. And I'm just going to very quickly do initial project commit. Okay, and commit all. Obviously, you can sync this up as usual to Visual Studio Online and all
Source
the other
control of
sources.
your choice.
Yeah, exactly. So that's great. So that's building, and that's kind of step one, just to show you how that works. But it's not very useful unless you actually publish it somewhere, right? So the next thing I'd like to show is what happens when you try and publish to an existing database, just like the one we've already come from, and also to a brand new one. Because we were talking about having dev, stage, and production. The magic behind this is that everything is, as you saw, create scripts. But when it comes time to publish, it will actually generate the correct alter statements to make it look the way it should.
Right.
So for the existing database, we should see very few changes, just maybe some settings where we had default settings and we didn't pull those in. And for a brand new database, it'll just create it straight out. So how about I show you that?
Yeah, let's do it.
Great. Okay. So if I choose to publish to my existing one, we'll just go here and go publish. Just like you publish, by the way, your ASP.NET websites.
Yep.
It's very similar.
Yeah, very
and
similar.
again, you just need to say, what's your target database? So since I already connected to it again, it's super quick. This is where I'll show you those huge amount of options that you have. This is a scary button to click whenever it says advanced.
I remember the first time I went in here, it was a scary moment to be told. I was like, oh boy.
Yeah, database development is complicated. The key things to look at here are, we will by default block you if you try and do a change that would cause data loss. So that's obviously your P0 scenario. The times you would uncheck this are basically when you're just in your local environment and you're doing a huge amount of changes and just want to tear down, restart.
Yeah,
you
that's
just
what
don't
I do
care.
in my local dev environment, right? I would never want to do it. Like, be careful there. Don't
Yeah,
keep the
yeah.
setting towards another.
That's right. That's
another
right.
deployment.
You can back up. You can do transactional deployment if you want. Again, these are great options for when you're deploying to production. You don't really need them locally. One of the key ones is choosing what to drop or ignore. By default, we'll leave things in the database that aren't in your project. Just say there's a schema that somebody else is using. You don't want to touch it. We'll ignore it. But if you do want a little bit more control,
or you want to punish your teammates who are secretly deploying stuff that's not in here.
That's true.
You turn this on.
You turn this on. So once you're comfortable with the process, everyone's on board, you'll turn this on. But what you might want to do in those cases is don't drop users, logins, or permissions, since those are often managed by your DBA.
Yeah.
And so
Certain
we've added
things
that.
Still should be separate.
Exactly. And so for people who haven't looked at this in a while, that's something that we've added in the last year or two, is the ability to say not drop your users, tables, etc., which is really powerful.
Yeah.
But for now, I'm just going to get out of this. And I always go and try and save my profile. So I'm just going to hit create profile here. And I'll generate the script to show you what would happen. So again, this is going against the existing database. You can see I was practicing beforehand on this. I'll just clear this out so that it's not quite so busy.
Yeah.
Okay, so when we get this, first off, if you click the preview window, you get a very helpful thing showing what's happening. And in this case, as you'd expect, almost nothing's happening. We just pulled it back in, nothing's changed.
Yeah, you're just comparing between what's in T-SQL, what's in the dev environment.
And it's the exact same. So here you go, and there's a little bit of Bootstrap code here just to set some properties, as you can see. But really, I just always know to skip those. Once it starts with the actual database, it does nothing.
Yep.
So it's happy.
Nothing yet.
Nothing yet. It's all good. So what happens if we deploy to something somewhere that doesn't exist already? So let's go publish, and this would be, for me, I often end up doing a little bit of database development before plugging it back into the application. So again, this is where I'd have my destructive, don't worry about block on data loss, etc. one.
Yeah.
So go in here, and instead I'm going to go to a different local DB instance. I'll just go to this projects v13. That's built in, again, when we create a project, we have our own dedicated server just so that we don't interfere with ASP.NET applications, etc. that might be expecting it on usually MS SQL local DB.
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay, so I am going to call this my health again and delete that. Okay, I'll create this profile as well. And I forgot to put
Database
that in.
name. Yeah.
My health, there we go. And I'll just save it, and again, I'll generate the script. And if you can publish directly, and we'll just save the script for you. But you know, oftentimes somebody wants to verify what's happening, so we're just showing that. So
my behavior with this initially was that we kept generating scripts and I kept manually running them.
Yeah.
I got very comfortable very quickly, especially for local dev, and I just let this thing publish out.
Yeah.
It makes sense. And then you can create the script and compare notes to somebody or send it over to show the changes you're about to push maybe to the shared environment or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah. So if you look at the preview here, you'll see that there's a huge amount of actions to create everything for the very first time. So in this case, it's going to create, and once we make changes later, we'll show you what happens.
And it's worth saying, I mean, again, you said this in the beginning, but I want to be clear kind of for our audience, which is there's just tables in this particular example.
Yeah.
But this works with functions and users and query, views and whatever, right?
And all
anything
the
in a
great new-
database, all the database objects. There's no like database object that this thing wouldn't have pulled in. It's just that our example doesn't have a complex scenario.
Exactly. So I'll just run this to publish it up to that database. Okay, and by the way, what's interesting is we've got some warnings here on maximum key lengths, etc. So we're not going to cover those, but it's a sign sometimes maybe you want to redesign your app, and that's where having control at the database level can be really good.
Sure, I'm the only one from my team here. I'll take it. We screwed this one up. I guess we should have hired a DBA.
There we go. No. The whole point of this tool is you don't need to have your dedicated DBA quite as much anymore. They're free to deal with the complex stuff. You can do all of your day-to-day applications.
Yeah, I remember at my one of the first companies where I used an early version of this back before Microsoft even, right? Many years ago, and the DBA actually started to love this. When I showed it them the first time, they were a little skeptical. They were used to SSMS. That's how they did things. They would manually check things in source control. It was really a hectic process. Then I started showing him Visual Studio. The person never even used VS much in their life. They used to be a developer a long time ago. And they switched to almost using this as the primary tool because it's just so powerful, even for a DBA. So it's not just a developer tool, in my view.
Yeah, it really helps, and once you get used to it, it can give huge power. A lot of DBAs, they happily move over, and some have to be persuaded, but that's where you can either give them a script that you've generated as the handoff point, or you can give them the DAC pack and let them use command line tools to deploy it that way, which is great.
For me, it was actually interesting. It was actually the reverse scenario, like from a mentality perspective. From a developer, you have to convince them that this gives you the advantage of having T-SQL in your project, and you can work as a team better, part of ALM, DevOps, awesome, right? Developers need to be sold on that. From the other side, DBAs, if you show this to them, the selling point is not just everything I just mentioned, but the fact that they can often hit a 5 and run the app that we developers run. And sometimes DBAs don't have that capacity, right? They just don't do dev day in, day out, right? They just do T-SQL in a big organization. This allows them to actually have the local dev environment. They could test the T-SQL change the same way we as developers could change it. They become even more part of the team. So I think this tool benefits both sides quite well.
That's right.
But it doesn't force you. Like you can have this just for one side of the fence. You could have it for nobody, if nobody wants to use it, but I think it works well in both kind of user types.
It does. So how about now we've got everything working, we know how it's going, how about we make some changes to this
Yeah,
thing?
let's do it.
Okay, so I think I mentioned to you, but this is currently very focused on doctors and what happens when you want to change that. So for me, I had to think about this. There's a lot of different ways to do that. Yeah. I decided that I really like having the simple table storing everything for doctor here. But really, it's becoming healthcare provider rather than doctor. Okay. So I don't want to break the existing app. And so what I'm going to do is kind of stage it. So I'm going to change this and make it be healthcare provider and change all of that. But I'll provide a view that's filtered to just the doctors. And so if everyone's familiar with SQL, but it's just you view over a table, we'll just simple query to filter it down.
Yeah, we don't have to change behind a view, therefore we don't have to change our code right away.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a really good suggestion in general. We should do a whole T-SQL, how to dev with T-SQL in this tool.
And being honest, I'm not the best because as with many people who I primarily code C#, my T-SQL skills are a lot worse than the people who'll be using this tool. So if I do mess up on the T-SQL, please be considerate on that part. I'm not. That's not my expertise. So the first thing I'm going to do is just add in a new column, which is going to be called provider type. and this is just going to be the name. I could use some set of types here or an enum, but what I'm going to do instead is I'll just use a description. So it's going to be nvarchar50, should be completely fine. I'll allow nulls because, for the existing ones, we're just going to assume anything that's null is a doctor. And I'm going to be using this in queries. So one of the things that I'm going to do is I'm going to add an index on it because you want it to perform pretty well. This makes it super simple. So I'll just add a regular index. I'm going to put it on this provider type column. So I'll put that in here. And once I do that, it will come in here. And obviously it's saying red because it doesn't know which column I want to put it on. So I'll just type in provider type. OK, so this is going to be the thing that separates out doctors from physical therapists in this example.
Yeah.
OK, so the other thing, and something that's really great that we can show is, I want to rename this. So it's no longer right to call it a doctor. But I don't want to do anything complex. I don't want to lose my data or anything like that. So I'm just going to use a rename function in here. So just like your C# projects, we have a couple of great refactorings. Rename is there, and it will actually do the rename while preserving all of your data, avoiding data motion. You can move it to a specific schema. You can expand the wildcards, which I'll show you, or do fully qualified names, which is great if you've got some confusion over things. So I'll just rename here and call this healthcare provider.
So this is our continuation of spoiling the SQL developer.
Yes, exactly. So once we do this, what's great is you actually get to see everywhere that's affected by that change. So you can see here that we already had an index on it. It's getting renamed now. The constraint that we had is getting renamed. And is there anywhere else? Just another constraint. So that's where all of the table is used. So I'm going to apply that, and those changes are added. There's also, by the way, a refactor log file down here. That's where these refactorings are stored, since databases are stateful. I'm also going to rename this Dr. ID. But first, I do want to make sure it's like, hey, what's the impact of this going to be? So I'm going to go, and one of the great things here, again, spoiling the developer, is that I can just find all of the references to this, so I know whether it's safe or a crazy idea to do this.
It's truly able to do that because, again, it's part of the solution and understands the context of the database in this.
Yeah, and again, this has just got tables at the moment, but if you've got views and stored procedures in particular, being able to see exactly where in the stored procedure it's used, maybe then verify all of your parameters are correct is great.
This is very useful.
So here you go, and you get all the symbol results just like anything else. You can see here that it's used in the clinic appointment and home appointment. And if I do look at that, I will see here that it's actually a column here called Doctor ID. So if I do want to change the name on this, I'll probably end up changing it in a bunch of places, which I'm going to do. So let's change the name on this. So again, I'm just going to refactor rename it.
Yep. So refactor works at different levels.
Yeah.
We can do it at the column level, which is awesome.
Yeah. So this is going to be provider ID. OK. Again, we get shown exactly where it's going to be affected. It does actually take effect in those things. So apply, and then because I saw those other ones were there, I'm going to refactor rename those as well. And just go in here, provider ID. OK, and I think there was one more. So let's just find all references again, since I am very lazy sometimes. And here we go, this one. OK, perfect. And if I go in here, I'll just go. And that should be all of them. And so what's great about this is you see how quick it is to make all of these changes.
Oh, yeah.
And there's just a lot of fear when you're doing this against a live database. Or what usually happens is you try and make the first change. It errors out because of all those other references.
You get that long list of errors, or you run the app and it crashes, which is the more realistic scenario if you don't even have this part of your solution.
Exactly.
Right. So the validation that you're getting would in fact be much greater, even without using refactor, but refactor is even better.
That's right. Yeah. Now, I will point out, though, the one thing that I didn't do here was update the code in the application to handle this. So when we're creating our view, we're just going to have to make sure that we're still using that same thing. Yeah. So now that we've done that, I'm just going to build, because I am paranoid. And what's great is you get this very quick validation loop through that. It worked, all good, happy. So
developers are paranoid because code is after us.
Yes.
It's not paranoia when somebody's trying to break your build.
That's right. So I'm going to add in the view now so that for the application it should be transparent going back to it. So again, as you mentioned, all of the items really are there. So I'll just show you in new item just the wealth of things: programmability, security, all of the latest things. If we go to tables and views.
And these are just templates, right? So just get you started quickly.
Exactly.
Basically everything in SQL that's scriptable.
Everything has a template. So you can see the new memory optimized tables since 2014 are there.
Those are awesome.
Great improvements, by the way, there. And temporal, which is proving really popular, which is it stores a record of all of the changes to your data over time. So that's been super popular feature of.
I could have used that, maybe 5 years ago. So you guys are catching up.
Yeah, no, it's great. You should definitely try it out.
We want more features. More features.
That's right. So I'm going to add this, and I'm going to call it add a view though, and I'm going to call it doctor, since that's what it is now representing.
See, if you were on my team, I'd send you an email, be like, you didn't put it in a folder called views. Come on.
I know. But for today, we're going to be a little lazy on it. If
so lazy.
Me.
But it's worth showing that in this aspect, like there's no enforcement of table structure or anything like that. This is purely for like even when you're importing, right? You can check different import options, create folders for tables or other settings, more flat structure if you like it.
Yeah, we've got a couple defaults there that tend to be what people like, but you can organize it any way you want after that. Yeah. So here again, you've got the usual IntelliSense here. So if I just go healthcare provider, it comes in. As I mentioned, I want to filter this down. So I'm just going to do a where clause. So it was provider type. Again, I love IntelliSense.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to assume it's doctor. But since all of the existing ones are there, I'll also do provider type is null, and I'm going to assume that anything null is a doctor.
We're like blasting past the IntelliSense of this, but this is full IntelliSense that's smart enough to understand the structure in which your database is created, right? So it knows that there's a table, it knows there's a column, it'll know there's a view, a function, again, all these different things we could have had in this application.
And that's how at build time it will validate. So if you try and do something where you're using the wrong data type, we will flag that. We'll either give an error if it's going to break, or we'll flag it if it's not. So those kind of really semantic, intelligent advisors are great to give you all of those errors. In this case, the other thing is that we wanted to change it. So we don't want to break the app, so we need to keep that original name the same. So you can see here you get the list. I'm too lazy to type those out, so I'm going to use another refactoring, which is to expand wildcards, which is great. You can see it all comes out, and you can see provider ID is there. I'm just going to format this so it looks good.
All right, folks out there in the universe, raise your hand wherever you are if you've typed this out manually. That's me. So we've all cried.
Yes,
we've done this.
So this is great. And then all I need to do here is to keep it all together. I'm just going to bring this back to be Dr. ID. I will escape it, which is just a good practice. As you can see, we try to enforce that pretty heavily as well to avoid any strangeness. And there we go. That's our view. One thing I actually forgot to do before I publish this, I'm going to want to validate this. So I'm just going to move some data across very quickly from the other server. So again, this can be hard, right, to do.
Can be. Unless you have the right tool. I mean, this is a lot of manual work.
Exactly. So I would just want to verify that this is going to work. Before I make any changes is the best time, because once I've changed the structure, it can be a little hard.
And so there's a couple of things to say here. First of all, a view needs data, right, to be functional in this particular case. So that makes sense. We need to bring the data over. But the other thing is that all of this change that you're making here locally, you can go and see which tables you've modified, which files, the C# files you've modified. You can see the change log. So this is still part of your change set that you could decide even to undo if this goes really badly. And I've had this happen to be one time in my career where I went down the rabbit hole of 6 hours of changes, and I stopped myself and I said, what am I doing? This is the wrong approach. And I undid checkout and everything, including T-SQL, because we were using SSDT. And it was just so beautiful. I mean, I made a local copy, I'll admit, just in case I wanted to go back to crazy. But you have that flexibility. And if you had your SSMS window open and you were changing SQL somewhere, even if it's under source control, it becomes this.
Yeah, it can be so hard to undo. You just don't know what you're doing. Whereas here, we've done all this, and yet because we're offline, nothing's happened yet. We've gotten all the same validation we would have, but it's all just ready to go.
Full validation. You can see where your changes are. You can decide to check it in. It's part of your work items association. All that is awesome.
Exactly. And when you are setting up and bootstrapping your test environment, you're usually going to have to pull over some data. So I'll just show you very quickly. Schema compare we'll hopefully get to, although we're running a little low on time. Data compare. Lets you compare the two databases. Now,
this is relatively new, right? This has been, it's been around. And tell people more about this, because I think this is one of the most hidden things in SSDT. It's a really cool feature.
Yeah, it's an interesting story. In the older versions, it was there. Then briefly, when we came out with SQL Server Data Tools as its own offering, it wasn't there. But within a few months, we caught up. We
a certain
brought it
developer
back.
named Dimitri remembers that, and he was like,
Yes.
"Come on, I actually needed it, but it wasn't there." I'm sure you guys had your reasons, right?
Yeah. It was just a lot of work, a lot of changes, and so it just took we wanted to make sure that we got in for SQL Visual Studio 2012.
Can't screw this up, right? You
Yeah.
can't screw up data compare.
Exactly.
You don't want people's data being wrong because Microsoft did it, right?
Yeah, but it does let you to compare basically all different types of records. I'm just going to choose the target, which is that other database that I created in LocalDB here. That's the one, hopefully, unless well, the good news is I can always hit cancel, which is great.
Yeah.
And I will go and browse back to it on my LocalDB instance and make sure that I have the right one.
As far as like demos go on Toolbox, I think you've done really well.
Not too bad.
I think we're so, I jinxed it, never mind.
It's
this is going
okay.
to go bad now.
Well, we'll see. I mean, the good thing is we did change this up so that it doesn't freeze anymore, which is great. So it got to show that you can just cancel out of things very easily.
Yeah, it's always nice.
So now that we have that, the thing to point out is the tables do have to be the same. So they have to have the same key for comparison purposes. Okay. And once you have that, you can list them. I'm going to compare everything, but if you have large tables that are, say, 100 gigabytes in size.
Yeah, this could take a while.
Yeah, so do be considerate of that. Be considerate if you're comparing against Azure or another cloud provider as well, that this is pulling it onto your own machine. So. Yeah. If
what
data
do we call
usage,
ingress and egress, all that
exactly.
charges. Yeah.
So just be aware of that. But obviously locally, it's very quick to show it. And what you can see here is all of the differences. So if we click on this one, you can see that, as you'd expect, we didn't put any data in the new one. You've got a bunch of data in the existing ones.
So this is our original database here in the source, and then the target is the new blank one we created, and that's why it has no data.
Exactly. And so what I want for my testing is just a couple of these. So I'm going to start unchecking some of them. And what I want, and I'll just make this a little smaller since the screen is bad, is I'm just going to do doctor, and I'm going to do the tenant ID, which I discovered earlier is the thing that everything else refers to.
Yeah, I was about to ask that question. It probably needs all the things it's doctor is referencing.
Yeah, so
the data can be inserted in a bad way.
Exactly. So it does know to order the tenants first, but it won't make it be checked. So that is something to be aware of. Yeah. But if I now update the target, and hopefully this will work because I tried it earlier, great. If I hit refresh, what you'll see now is for the doctor, all of the things are identical, which is great. And again, if you've made changes, it will just show you the changes.
Yeah. And it's showing 0, not because there's no records, it's showing 0 because there's no differences in the two. So source to target. And also, you could have generated a script here, right? So if you, again, want to take that script-based approach, or just you want to hit that button, look at the script, then just hit update. It's something you can always do.
Yeah, and it's great for reference data. If you want to have your scripts generated for you, once you've put some of it in, it can be a great way to just script out that reference data.
Yeah, huge.
Okay, so we're done with data compare. Now we've got our data across, and I can actually start testing my view. So let's see what happens before I make my changes. So I'm going to make the changes to the database over here. I'll just hit refresh since we added it. Great. And now that we've got that in there, if I look at the doctor table, again, viewing data is very simple. It's super easy to edit this, which is really great. And you can see all of the data there. There's about 8 rows worth of data. So hopefully whatever we've done will make 8 rows worth of data changes. So here is my publish for, I believe, LocalDB. You can rename those. Great. So I'm going to start trusting this, and I'm just going to hit the magic publish button.
The magic button.
Yes. So this does all the same steps. So you still have a preview to give you the high-level summary. You still have the script, but it will just automatically publish it at the end and tell you, hooray, it worked.
Yeah, one thing that I remember myself missing at first was these blue links on the right here. If you have especially a very large, I have one of those large 34-inch displays, a widescreen. This could be pretty far on the right. Yeah. Clicking on those take you to the individual scripts and such.
But again, they are great, especially the preview I like because I don't have to figure out the SQL. I just get a very short summary of what's happening.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And again, if you look at what happened there, by the way, actually we should go into that briefly. We renamed these 4 things. Yeah. We altered the table and we created the new things. And it did it all in the right order. If there's anything complex, it will say drop constraints, do all of the things it needs. But in this case, if I just view the script, it's pretty clean script, which is great. We're usually pretty smart about these things. So we rename the doctor, rename it doctor ID to provider ID, So a bunch of just very simple renames, and that's something SQL Server supports that will just change it without any data movement or anything.
Yeah, and it's a very verbal script file that it generates. It does all the print statements, so as it's running in SSMS, let's say you give it over to your DBA or whatever, your teammate, they can see what's going on. I really love how this tool does it.
Yeah, and it's smart enough to just alter the table after that, create an index on that, then create the view, and it does it all in the right order, which is really great. This bit at the end is just the refactor log, so that it traces the steps. So if you try and apply it again, it knows that you've done all of these renames. Great, so that was awesome. And now I'm just going to test things. So I wrote this, and hopefully it will work. So we can now view, if I just refresh this, I should see that my doctor has gone away, and healthcare provider is here instead. So I'll just view the data on that. As you can see, it still has all of the data.
Yeah.
But what's funny is this one, hopefully this will work. If I hit refresh on this, oh, no, it's not happy with that because it was a table.
Yeah, because it's doctor that's trying to pull out.
But if I go down to the views, views are also editable the same way, which is great. And that
was actually a good error because it doesn't assume that just because you have something named the same, that it's the same thing and it's a valid scenario. It's like, look, there's no more doctor table.
Yes.
Go bring a view version of this up.
Exactly. And so now I'm just going to start muddling with this data a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make sure what I would do is make one of these a doctor and make sure it still works. Once I tab off of the row, it will just automatically commit it up. So that should still work. But now if I change one of these so that they're no longer a doctor, but instead a physical therapist, what I'm hoping for is, yes, we'll see how close it is. Yeah, we can fix that up later. If I go over here and I hit refresh, you'll see that it's missing row 7
Yeah,
now.
because it doesn't meet the view criteria, right?
Exactly. So what's great about this then is that everything else is the same. My application will continue, but now I can add a new page that's very simple based on the other healthcare provider type, and I can expand my app out. I'll check this in now and go from there. And I've just one last feature to very quickly show, which is schema compare. So as with everything, you can see your history over here, all of the objects that we have. So I'll just say refactored to support. Again, spelling is fun when you're typing live.
If I was graded on spelling for my job, I wouldn't be here.
There you go.
We all have things we're good at. But
yeah. So I'll just close these down, and then there's just one last thing which we mentioned would be useful for everybody. So this has been really powerful, and you can see how this all works. If you're using Entity Framework, you just need to not do the auto migrations, and instead have part of your script be that you, when you're publishing, just publish this beforehand.
Yeah, but I mean, I think this tool has like various use cases, right? You can use it just to kind of do a sanity check from one environment to the next, from one local database to the next. You can use it to replace migrations. You can use it in some instances where something went wrong. You know, there's all sorts of, I think, awesome use cases.
That's it. And so the last one then is when you do want to be able to understand things and see what's changed, one really powerful thing is schema compare. So you get your history through Git or through TFS integration. You get that great history file by file. But what you don't know is how does that compare to the real database?
Yeah, and here you've right-clicked on your data project. So your SSDT project now has these various SQL-related options.
That's right. And so schema compare will let you compare your project to any database, to databases to each other, or even those DAC packs we mentioned.
The DAC packs are really cool.
You know, so if somebody gives you a random DAC pack, you can actually use this as a DBA to actually verify what's going on and understand all of the changes that are going to happen in a very simple, intuitive way.
Yeah, and I've done this in real life. Like again, my own development, like I'm just one guy working on a solution. So I keep all my DAC packs from every deployment, and I just did it that way. At the time, I wasn't using EF migrations, and I had an issue, and I had to like compare back to a previous deployment I did, and I found out what my issue was like so quickly. Otherwise, I'd be sitting there like, what changes do I have? Imagine it's not even source control. Oh my gosh, you know, or it's a zip file somewhere on some SharePoint site. Have you ever had that? Like
I have, and actually I'll just show you. So I'm just going to choose this database first, and I'm going to go up to my original database over here on ASP.NET. And hit OK. I'll actually show you one just quick tip and technique for how to make that handy. If you do want to reference a couple, like say, hey, here was my original or major impactful changes to look back, you can very quickly go and, where is this hidden at? There should be Snapshot. So Snapshot will just create a DAC pack which is the backup at this point in time for you. You can then have that checked in, and that's great if you want to bootstrap it for these kind of comparisons. So if you're
and it's based on your project, right?
Based on my project,
because you created it here, and you can also create the same snapshots of a database in some environment. And I've had that in reverse, where again, like, man, I've worked so much with this tool. I forget how much I worked with SSDT. There was a scenario where the production environment was having an issue. I got a snapshot from the DBA. I didn't have access to that environment. I compared it, and right away I saw something was missing from a deployment script. For some reason, like didn't make sense, but sometimes you just got to fix the issue first, and then keep going, right?
Exactly. Yeah. No. So it's really great. It will work against pretty much any database you have. If you just want to quickly, like that, get it out in a pretty secure way. It's small. It's simple.
Awesome.
So that's snapshots. Bonus feature for people, since I hadn't planned to show that. And now, when we do schema compare, the first thing I'll say is I really hope that this looks good, because on my machine is the only one that sometimes doesn't show this by default, but it was friendly to me and decided to be nice, which is great.
Okay.
So this shows all of the changes that have happened. So you can see here that this has changed, the provider ID, the constraint, just regular, diff viewer here, so you can see exactly what's changed. See the darker color is where something is different on both sides. So you can see that these have been altered, altered again here with slightly more changes, and this one here again. And again, it's smart enough to know it was healthcare providers, now doctor. And finally on the view, this is a brand new view, so it's
the icon indicating here, like we have a plus that shows that this is new. We have a little edit, like pen.
Change,
one day we need to make that a computer or a keyboard as icons, as people forget what pens are eventually.
Yes.
The other cool thing is that update button, right? The fact you can change or fix the issue if there's one.
And so you can update it. If the target is a project or a database, you can directly update it. As with everything, you'll start noticing there's always a script button there. So if you're worried, it's always there. And again, there are a huge amount of options, again, for this, pretty much very similar options. The one part that I would like to show as well is what happens if you try and disable something. So if I try and undo this, it will get unchecked, and so different ones like this and this.
Well, this is great. So I've used this when I find a change, but that's not the change I want to push. Like maybe I'm in the middle of two things, and the one thing that's keeping me from moving forward in some test environment, I just uncheck the thing that I'm going to fix later, or it's not breaking. So empowering the user, right? That's what we're trying to do here.
Yeah. So that's it, and that's really the high-level tour of most of the features. Just a couple things that this is, a small part of what this does. It's got database unit testing, the ability to add in advanced static code analysis rules, some of which is extensible. So you can pull in, if you've got your own set of business rules, you can embed them as logic into your project, so that whenever you build, you'll get flagged if you've got naming issues, etc. Among many other things here. So do check it out, and also if you are still a SQL Server Management Studio user, also realize that the latest version of that is out as well. It works against monthly also, works against, again, older versions of SQL Server all the way back really well. And so, the SQL tools are thriving, well worth a look, and this will hopefully help you in your day-to-day development.
All right, well, Kevin, thank you so much for being on Toolbox, and thank you for everybody who watched it. I hope you find SSDT useful. We'll put some links to the tools, to the example we showed, to anything that was relevant. We'll get all up there, and we'll have you back on. There's a lot more to talk about.
Yeah.
All right, thank
Thanks
you very
much.
Thank you. Hi there, and welcome to another episode of Visual Studio Toolbox. I'm your host, Dimitri Lylan, and I'm excited to be back with Eric. Eric, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dimitri.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about SQL Server data tools today, one of my favorite topics. I've been on with Kevin, you've been on this show with Robert, right, talking about this, and today we're going to talk about the DevOps pipeline. So why don't you give us some details?
Yeah, today the main topic is about the SQL Server and the SQL database on Azure, CI/CD, in DevOps pipeline. So to get there, we are going to start with the database development approach, which is a migration-based approach, which is more traditional, and state-based database approach. And then we will jump into CI/CD. Most of this session, we'll go through, we will run it over demos so that they can be more exciting.
Yeah, we love demos.
That's the plan for today.
Sounds good. So just to set the context for people a little bit more, just in case, maybe some of you aren't as familiar with all this technology and all the acronyms here.
Yeah.
So we're going to specifically look at how a Visual Studio, let's say Visual Studio 2017 developer using the SQL Server data tools, right, can use all this technology that we have for the
Right.
developer in Visual Studio to let them work with SQL. SQL is part of their source control, the team-oriented development, and specifically the DevOps pipeline, which
Yeah.
is all the stuff that you're gonna demo.
Exactly. Yep, you got it right.
Awesome.
So let's start with what is the migration-based and state-based? What's the key difference?
Yeah.
So the key difference between those two approaches is about what is the system of truth for your database. In migration-based development, your live database is the system of truth.
Been there.
All right, I will get there. So
Yeah.
state-based database development, your database source code is the system of truth. So let's get to the demo
Yeah.
and take a look at what is really mean, right, in this session.
Awesome. Let's take a look.
Right. Okay, so let me switch to application. This is my demo application. It's called the BanchoWorks directory. And let's put on a hat as an application developer today. Okay.
Awesome.
So we are not like the professional DBAs, or we are application developers.
Sure.
So, this app-
what kind of app is it? Like, is it?
yeah,
an
this
SPNet,
one
I'm
is
assuming?
Azure Web App Service using a SQL database on Azure. So basically, what it does is that it pulls down the employee information and like a phone book. And if you click one of the employee information, it shows detail of that employee. Now, if you take a look at that, there are sensitive informations there, right? So as a developer, I start my day by looking at my work. So if I expand it, then the task for today is that make sensitive, mask sensitive employee information. So we are showing like a phone number and then the emails. So ask is mask it, hide it.
Sure.
Right?
Very
So-
very common ask.
yeah, exactly. So in SQL Server 2016, there is a great feature called the dynamic data masking, my favorite demo scenario, that you can really easily mask any sensitive information without making any single line of change in your application.
Right. So the
let's
database handles all the masking in your application, just gets the
Exactly.
data back and displays it however we choose the mask
Right.
to be applied.
Right.
Cool.
So let's look at the migration-based approach first. Ever since SQL language was invented back in 1970, database developers have lived in the world of writing and executing create, alter, and drop statements.
Yes.
And then for making changes to your database, right?
And then emailing those scripts to your friends and the team
Yeah, that's right.
to run locally.
That's right. And until you release the first version, it's straightforward. You can do all the dev actions. But once you have the first version released to the public, then you have many users using your app and services day and night. And then a change like this is business of altering your live database. So let's take a look at what it is. So first, let's take a look at what we have. I will execute it against I'm connecting to my live database, which is running on local, which is my dev environment. So I connect.
So you got SQL Server 2016 installed locally.
Right. Cool. I'm running SQL Server 2016 locally as a dev environment, which is my currently the live data. Right. And I execute it. As you see, emails are all shown very clearly. Right. So the key thing is that with the dynamic data masking in SQL Server 2016, it's really simple code change like this. There's 2 lines of code, and I will execute it. Boom. 2 errors. Right. So your database is the system of truth. Now, as a developer, I need to understand what's in there exactly, right? And then I can understand what is these errors, right? Right now, what message is telling us is that the employee view has dependency on the table that I modify, and also there are other objects that is actually using this table at the same time. So to figure out as a developer in the migration approach, either you need to get a great tool to figure this out, or you have to have a great knowledge about your live database already. Or you have to ask around your friends and experts.
Or keep trying to alter until you run out of error messages.
So that's kind of a typical approach. And let's do that in the state-based approach, and then see the difference there, right? Okay, so in state-based, as I mentioned, I'm going to Solution Explorer. Everything is based on source code. That's your system of truth, not the live database. what is most natural way as an application developer to make a changes or dropping or creating a new version of application, right? Let's take a look at, before we jump into a database side, let's take a look at the application. So I have this is my web application code, it's written in C#, and there is a vEmployee model class, right? So let's say if you don't need this property, what you do is you delete it on the source code file. If you want to modify, then you modify the changes on your source code file.
Right.
That's what you do, and that's now you have a new state of your application, and then you build it, test it, and you install it, right? Or deploy to the web app service, right?
Sure.
So that's the practice. You can do the exactly same thing. Let me just close this one. Don't save it. If you go to a database project, SSDT database project, which is all state-based, then you do the exactly same thing. All your database objects are captured in the project as a source code.
Right, and SSDT is smart enough for those that maybe haven't tried it in a while. I mean, it knows the relationship between it. It really is kind of rich IntelliSense, friendly environment. It's part of your source control, part of your project.
Right.
And get latest on your developer friend next door to you. Next desk over, we'll get the changes you're making here. So it's a great way to collaborate, but you still have some challenges you got to work through.
Yeah. So let's make the same change, like altering it. Now here, likewise, you modify the class in your C# or Java. In state-based, you're not dealing with alter business. It's always your definition of a table, which is defined and created. You can always look at the your table in holistic view.
Right. You make a change. It knows you made the change. You're deploying it. It will alter accordingly. It doesn't require you to create alter statements.
Exactly.
That's what we're trying
so
to
just
here.
declare the state where your table should be, like this, right? So in this case, I made a change, exactly same change on the definition stuff, and I go build. Okay.
So first, we showed like kind of the ad hoc capability of SSDT from Visual Studio to run SQL code, right? So you ran some SQL code just to demonstrate that wasn't as straightforward as change as you thought, and now you're doing it more of like the way we would recommend people do this in this kind of approach.
State-based.
Yeah, in state-based.
Right. So the build was successful. There was no error. And then, likewise, you're installing app, but you can install or publish, if you will, to your live database, which is a target. So,
so like your dev database, let's say your common dev database.
The concept is that you're making your target, whatever it is, to the state of your source code that you just developed and verified. That's basically the key concept. So to make it easy, I made the publish profile here. So I can just double click, that goes to my local database, and I run it.
Right. Alternatively here, I love the fact that you can generate the script if you can't.
Yeah.
Or let's say you don't want to run it until you look at what the changes are that it's generating.
Exactly. I'll show you that one.
Yeah.
So
error.
Okay. Let me quickly show. Probably we have to do it again.
Yeah.
It's a data loss case. So just a second.
It's trying to protect us.
Yeah. All right, this is the one.
So what we just showed here is actually, when you get an error like that from SSDT, if you're confident that the change is something you want to go for, especially like in a dev environment, right?
I see.
In production, you would think about this a little bit harder.
All right. So you want to know what happened? Actually, this is my fault. I was kind of prepping the demo and then practicing it on my local machine. And I actually made the really dangerous changes at the same time that could cause the data loss in a situation.
Yeah.
So it actually, SSDT detected smartly and stopped it because there is a possible the error of losing your data, right? So if we go to the publish setting, and there is a one
Yep. The
this
block
one,
incremental.
block
yeah.
incremental deployment if data loss might occur. It was checked, so it was basically blocking it.
Yeah,
so
and that's,
that they
that's
can
the default
protect it.
setting, right?
That
The
is
default is to be
setting.
most protective.
That is right. So I was not expecting, so that's why I was, what's happening
Yeah.
here? But that's actually a legit feature, and it's a great feature that we can always guarantee that you don't have a data loss. And at least you have to, like me, you have to figure out, wait a second, the data loss can happen, so I have to check it out. So my change was just the changing the column size here and there.
Yeah.
That was my experiment before this session. So that's what happened. So,
problem.
so that's
we,
safe.
we don't have bugs, folks. We show features. That's
Right.
we
Just
have
in the
features.
demo,
yeah,
it
this
was
is part of the demo,
unexpected, right?
Unexpected part of the demo.
Unexpected, right?
I like
So
it.
let's run it again. So actually, it's another demo of data protection. Right?
Yeah.
I wasn't expecting, so I was like, a little bit confused. But yes, it is a part of the SSDT feature. Now it is successful. So let's go back to our script.
And I love the fact that it shows you the various states of publish, right? So you can see what happened
Exactly.
before versus what succeeded now.
Exactly.
I always find it irritating when the tool kind of takes away the previous state, and you're like, oh, what did happen? Maybe you need to email somebody about that, even though it worked for you now locally.
Yeah.
So that's great.
I will show you that part after seeing the result. So
All right.
now I'm running my query as a suspicious user and see what happens with a dynamic data masking. If you take a look at here, it's all masked.
Right.
Right?
So, so
That's
the
the-
data is still there, but SQL Server is just taking one of its capabilities, masking it, and
Right.
you as this user with this level of access, with this query, that's what you're going to get, and therefore
Exactly.
an app could get the same
Exactly.
data.
The same here clause works, and the index is defined on this field. It all works, exactly as is. That's the dynamic data masking, the great feature. So let's see then how it worked. Before, with just a simple auto statement, it was not working, right? But
Yeah.
with the statement, state-based, it worked. So let's take a look at the preview. What happened? Basically, SSDT detected that the email address table has dependencies on the many others, like employee view has a schema binding here. You see that I will make it bigger.
Yeah.
It has a schema binding, and then the view itself has a dependency with many other stuff here, right? So to make that the simple change work in migration way, I will show you the script.
Yeah, and so before we showed you like the preview of what the changes were. That's why there was no coloring of the IntelliSense, 'cause, it wasn't code. And here's the actual code it generated.
Exactly. The other one is just a summary report.
summary report,
Right? And then this is actual code that ran against the target database based on your state in project, right?
Right.
So it's a bunch of this code had to be executed to make those simple auto statement successful. So using SSDT powered by DAGFX, it intelligently figures out all these dependencies and schema bindings and index matter, and it produces the necessary TSQL scripts when you deploy your changes to target database. So depends on your target database version. It can be a different version. It has different the content in it, like in terms of schema. Then it produces different schema that changes your database to the state of your source code,
Right.
which is your system of truth.
Right.
That's a state-based. So we just covered the basic, right? That's the difference between migration versus state-based database development. And the state-based development is very natural to application developer because that's the way that application developers change their application code.
Right. So if you're changing C#, that's what you expect. You wouldn't expect anything else kind of as a
Exactly.
process. You would want to just have your source code be the truth, and
Exactly.
your published version, right, is just
Yep.
executable. Database in this case is being treated as an executable, so to speak, right?
Exactly.
And like this is the way that I worked with SSDT in a couple of projects that I worked on last, and it works great even in a large team setting. So we had like 25 devs, and everybody could just get up and running from get file, get latest version from source
Right.
control, do this sort of change to their local database, even if they went on vacation for a week or two, right?
Yeah.
They weren't asking for scripts from us,
Right.
and then we can actually leverage the script to change other environments, like the common dev database or whatever. So this process, like I can testify to, it works really well.
Thank you.
First-hand
Yeah,
experience.
I totally agree on that one. So now we just covered the basics, right? Let's jump into a CI/CD pipeline, right? Database CI/CD. Nowadays, the continuous integration and continuous deployment is common practice for any serious application development project. Everybody just uses it. It became as a, the standard and then something that you must follow. If you develop your database in state-based using project, then it naturally goes to database CI/CD pipeline, because there is no much difference between your application CI/CD practice versus database CI/CD practice in this matter. That's the main reason that I showed you application change first and then shows you the database change. It's basically the same, right?
Yeah, it's just CI/CD is the automated version of what we just demonstrated.
Exactly. So let's take a look at then what you do is that in application development, what you do is that you make a change and then you check in. So let's check in. So it's I did it in the channel 9 VS Toolbox demo. I will just write it.
You just broke all the rules about how do you comment your check-ins, but it's okay. We'll let you get away with this one.
Yeah, for this one, I will just get rid of it. It was kind of the demo error, right?
Sure.
And this is the main change. And what you do is that you can commit. I will just do it, commit all. And now I have one commit, so I can push it. That's common practice for any developer does, right? Yep. Commit it and push it. And also on the source control, you create a pull request, and we're gonna just skip that part, but that's the same process that you do on database development using project.
Yeah, it's not specific to what you're demoing, so totally get it.
So now I checked it in, right?
Yep.
Then if I go to Visual Studio Team Services and build, then you see here, the new build is automatically triggered. It's now happening. The good thing is that Visual Studio Team Service has a great CI/CD feature, and it has all the database CI/CD feature built in as well, and it's greatly integrated with the Visual Studio. So by just applying the same concept of using the application CI/CD, using Visual Studio and the Visual Studio Team Service, then it just flows through the database development as well. That's basically what I'm demoing now. So the new build is triggered automatically, and it's just running. So while it's running, it would just take in a couple of minutes, and let's take a look at what is in there.
So for somebody that might actually not be familiar with what we're demoing here, this is Visual Studio Team Services. Yeah, so we're in that portal. Has a, we can view some of this data for Visual Studio, but then we can get the richest set of data through the portal itself.
So let me then explain a little bit for people who are not familiar. The Visual Studio Team Service is like your the source control repository, and then the command center to run the CI/CD pipeline and all those goodies, right? So that's how I understand it from the database developer perspective. So if you go to code, you saw all the code that is running on the Visual Studio, but it's the source is basically on here. It was on the pull request. So it was all the source code is here. So if you're running in a team environment, then everybody can just clone this repository to local, develop it, and check in. That's what you can do. There is no difference between any other, right? The application development, and then
very standard,
it has the flow of a build and release, and the flow. Those are mainly two things that we are demoing today, and we have those. So that's kind of a very nutshell, high-level version of what it is. So let me go back to...
So our build succeeded here, it shows.
Right. So this one was the one, and it already passed, right? So I will quickly show you how simple it is to just have CI build going with the VSTS, SSDT, and Visual Studio.
Great.
So the get source is just the common template. All those tasks are defined in template like this, right? So for database development, what you care about is that these are all the common steps that you do, like defining the location of your source. And if you have an application running, web app in my case, it has a NuGet dependency.
Right, it has to store any dependencies on the server side, do the build.
And this is the key thing. SSDT database project has a built-in support from MS Build, so you can just build a project using MS Build.
So there's nothing special. You're not installing additional tools. It's just part of the build process.
Yeah. So you can just any other app application in a application build, you can just specify what is your the solution name, And that's it, basically. And this one is something specific for SSDT. If you define this parameter, let's make it bigger. Then instead of using disk for temporary the artifacts while it's kind of building and then the analyzing your data source, database source, it uses memory.
Do you need to add this parameter, or is this something you're adding?
It's optional, and it makes things much faster.
So you optimize
you
made the build faster, but you
Yes.
you manually went in here and added this argument. So if folks don't add it, it still works, but it'll be slower in the build pipeline.
Yeah, that is right.
Got it.
And that's basically, and this one is also a common thing that after the artifacts are created from the build, then you're basically publishing or copying those artifacts to the server, so that later on the release process can get those artifacts and use it, right? So it's a common practice for common steps for any application projects.
Right.
Okay, that's basically it, and you can see the whole history of your build operation for yourself and your team members and everything. If I click one of the build, now it runs, right? And if you take a look at the deployment, the key thing is that whenever there's a new build successfully finished, then continuous deployment occurs. That means it picks up the build artifacts and then deploy it to your target location. It can be your production, it can be your test, anything like this.
So in this pipeline, two steps got to finish successfully. It's got to build it all successfully, and it's going to push it all successfully.
That is correct. So if I go to the release, then probably it's already finished, and I will show you. So I had the setup like a workflow. In this workflow, what is that the first one is deploying the database to user acceptance test.
Let's just go straight to production. I mean, what can go wrong?
Yeah, it's more like like a safety net to have a test, deployment, and then have some integration test or the user acceptance test, and if everything is good, then Visual Studio Team Service has like a sign-off process. So if the authorized person can go and sign off, then production deployment occurs automatically as well. So that's basically the good thing about.
If you're not building a demo app, you want multiple steps.
Right.
That's the reality.
Right. So
unless you're completely crazy, but I've seen all things.
Deployment is even more simpler, actually. So I have two tasks, but you can choose one or the other. Visual Studio Team Service has a task, built-in task, that is called the Deploy Azure SQL DACPack. DACPack is the artifact of the project build, right?
Right. So that was the output of the build process, and you knowing that that's part of something you wanted to get released during this pipeline, you went in here, and I'm assuming you had to manually add the task, but it was a template that you already had. So VSTS knows about this kind of task, but you still have to configure it. So that's something people need to be aware of.
Right. So configuration is very simple. I will highlight this part. So if you take a look at, because it's a deployment to a server, a SQL server, Azure SQL Server database, or SQL database on Azure. So the key thing is the connection part, right?
Right.
So these are the connection strings and your admin. The good thing is that for password, but it's protected. So it's protected through variables. So if I go to variable, you can define your variable and then actually hide it.
Yeah, during demos like this, nobody sees your password.
Right. So that's a good thing about that one. And then the rest of them is pretty good and they're simple. That's the key thing for your specific environment. And the rest of them is the same thing, just in the location of the DACPack file. So it's kind of a template. So for a database project, probably this is kind of same for all the projects, right? So so that's as simple as this. That's it. So when I was preparing the demo, wow, it's really simple, right?
Yeah.
And if you want to do it in command line and bring in your own version of DAC, FX, or SSDT version for your specific need, or you want to host it in your own private agent, then you can run the same operation using command line. We have a tool, command line tool called the SQL package. Basically, these two tasks are doing the same thing. It's called the SQL package.exe, but in this case, it's more like you have control.
Yeah. So if you have really, extreme scenarios or things you just don't fit the standard template, you're not blocked. You can still set up this pipeline, but you have to know how to configure this command line based tool.
Exactly.
Cool.
All right. So let's go to our application, and it was the state, right, before the change. And if I refresh it,
there you go.
now it is a new state, which is data, dynamic data masked on emails. Without changing any application code, it happened, and without going through all the like executing alter statements to your live database, you just change your source code file, right?
Yeah.
And
change your SQL, and your app reflects it in your
exactly
in your Q&A environment in this case.
Exactly, the
Cool.
user acceptance. So this is the power of adopting state-based and the database CI/CD pipeline in your DevOps, right, practice. So that's basically the key thing that I wanted to demo today. And as you saw, using the SSDT and state-based, then you can easily, quickly, and efficiently adopt this DevOps practice to your current database development, the process.
Yeah.
And I call it modernize, the definition of easy, quicker, and efficient. And the good thing is that note that SQL Server is only our DBMS in the market that supports solutions for both migration-based and state-based, right?
Cool.
And migration-based approach, there are great tools that can help going through those alter the coding and the execution business. And in Visual Studio 2017 Enterprise Edition, the Renegades Ready role is now included in that Visual Studio Enterprise Edition. And it's a great tool that even it can enable CI/CD pipeline as a part of your development practice. So at the end, it is a kind of your choice, which fits best, right? We, as Microsoft, we provide you which choices based on whatever your choice is, we provide you full support on that one.
Right. So if you're just a customer of Visual Studio, any addition SSDT is there for you for the state-based. And
Exactly.
then if you're an enterprise customer 2017, or if you own the license of Redgate for your own purposes or some other potential tool out there in the marketplace at some point, it's going to be integrated for you for those solutions.
Right.
Cool.
So if you haven't tried SSDT and Visual Studio Team Service-based those DevOps pipeline CI/CD, then try it today. SSDT is fully supporting all editions of Visual Studio 2017. Today you saw that I demoed it on the community version of, edition of Visual Studio 2017.
The free version of our product.
Right, exactly. And VSTS is also free for small team with 5 users. And the great unlimited features like a Git repo and the work item management that I started in my demo. And it has one private agent, that's great. And one hosted agent with 4-hour use per month for free.
That's awesome.
And if
so
you find
flexibility,
it really,
and it's free.
Yeah, exactly. And then you tried it out today. It's all you can just start without the adding any cost on your side. And then if you like it, then you can go into Visual Studio Team Service paid version for your real team project and kind of stuff.
Yeah, awesome. So you got some resources for folks to take a look at here.
Yeah, I have. If you want to find out more about what is DevOps, there's a great the keynote by Brian Harris. Shift left concept as part of the Visual Studio 2017 launch keynote.
Yeah, very fresh video, very recent.
Yeah, exactly. So I have listed the useful references here, so you can just go and find out more about all about SSDT, all about database CI/CD, and then even have a database CI/CD tutorial posted on my blog. So you can go and then follow just step by step. Then you can do exactly the same thing that I did today in your own environment. And if you are Mac and Linux developers, then the CI/CD part is not there yet, but we have a great tool like MS SQL extension for VS Code. So you can get started in developing your application and database on Mac and Linux as well.
That's awesome. Yeah, and we're trying to bring the goodness to every platform where we have developers, and
Right.
VS Code runs everywhere. So that's awesome. And then
That's
Visual
right.
Studio and Windows has all this already
Yep.
up and running. And I'll be sure to put all these notes into the show description, so folks don't have to worry about memorizing the
Oh, yeah,
long
of
URLs
course.
here. We'll get them posted. And thank you so much for being on the show, Eric.
Thank you for inviting us.
All right. Well, we'll be back with more next Visual Studio Toolbox. Thank you very much for watching.
Thank you.
Hi there, and welcome to another episode of Visual Studio Toolbox. I'm excited to be back once again with my friend Eric King. Eric, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dimitri.
Thank you for coming back. Well, we've been doing a three-part series on SQL Server data tools, a topic
Right.
that a lot of our viewers are interested in, certainly a great way to do database development. And today, you're back to talk about a third part in our series. This is something
Right.
we were hoping to get to, and we finally got to it. So what are we going to talk about today?
Okay, in the first episode, we talked about the key concept, the core concept, and the key features of SSDT.
What is this thing, and how can it help
Exactly.
our community?
And, in the episode 2, we talked about the database CI and CD. Right. Today, we are going to talk about database unit testing.
Awesome.
All right.
Well, I think that brings us to every bullet you wanted to hit. So that's really, really awesome. And if folks, if you missed the episode that we did, the other two that we just talked about, they're up on Channel 9, of course. Go to Visual Studio Toolbox or go to the Visual Studio YouTube channel. You'll find those shows there. But hey, we've got a great topic, so we're going to jump right into it. So Eric, why don't you take it over?
Okay, thank you very much, Dimitri. Okay, so today we are going to talk about unit testing in DevOps pipeline. So let's set a goal for the demo. I will just jump right into the demo, and instead of talking too much before the demo.
Our audience wants more slides, actually.
Really?
I'm getting tweets already.
I only prepare always 1 or 2
You
slides.
only have only two
Yes,
slides?
yes.
All right, we're going to have to deal with it.
Okay, and let's set up a goal for today's episode. As a developer in DevOps practice, I want to unit test my database codes like C#, a Java program to achieve high code coverage. So if you're an application developer, you already practice unit testing, integration testing, and functional testing, right? So why don't we bring that good practice, tested practice, into database as well? I'm going to talk about that one.
Sure.
And
Well, let me ask you a question to that point. Like as a developer that's never, I'll be honest, I never had unit tests on my data layer. That was just
Right.
not where we went. We barely had unit tests on our code side.
Yeah.
But I guess the way that I always thought about it, and again, I'm just speaking honestly for myself, is that by testing the code that ran against the SQL, I was testing the SQL, right? So that was sort of an indirect way. What would be some of the benefits of testing SQL at the data layer?
I see. So it's kind of a fundamental way of change in terms of a fundamental way of thinking. So before, we treated database as more like a runtime that has data, and as your application to run, then you need to have a database as runtime, and then you focus on application testing, right?
Yeah, the data was just a structure, and the data was the data, right? And
Right.
the app is really what mattered, was a lot
Right.
of the mindset.
But in reality, your database, like store procedures and functions, have the business logic for your application as well. So if you want to have the good practice of testing, validating your outcome end to end, then why you miss out database?
Right.
Right?
Makes
That is
sense.
basically very fundamental thought. And nowadays, instead of thinking the database as runtime, SQL Server instance as the database and the runtime, you think more holistically. Most applications have a database layer, and holistic view, application and database is an integral part of the application as a whole solution, right? So that is a way of thinking. And with a CI/CD, you want to put the application and database into the CI/CD pipeline. Then for application case, you always have a gated build using tests as a part of the CI process.
Makes sense, yeah.
Then it makes sense to have a database test in your CI build so that you can always have a gated build in your CI pipeline.
Right, so you put validation this way all across your application, and
Yes.
and for sure we've all had those monster store procedures
Right.
with tons of logic, and
Right.
sometimes hard to test from the app code because by the time you get to it, right, or which paths of code won't get to MySQL, right? There's always that question that you're struggling with is building the unit test in the code side. So I guess by building against SQL directly, you're making sure that you really do test every input parameter you care about and every other scenario there.
So the common practice of unit test for application is that you test the program's business logic at the smallest unit, like functions.
Yeah.
Right. So if you apply that concept to database, your store procedures and functions and the triggers, those are like functions in your application, and those are the subject of the unit testing. If you test your application with other modules and then other components, including database, then it is a stage of integration test. So you already the graduated the unit testing. So if you just focus on database testing and the integration testing or functional testing, then you end up having no unit test for database, right? So today we are going to kind of show you how you can easily enable unit testing on your database. If it takes like days and days to learn and enable, then it's too hard, right?
Yeah, but it gets harder.
Right. So the techniques and technology solution that I'm going to show you today, probably you can enable it within an hour.
Awesome. All right, let's jump in.
Okay. Okay, before we go, I will briefly introduce you the open source DB unit test frameworks. It's new. It's my pleasure to introduce Slacker and Slacker Runner. TCL-T is another the open source unit test, database unit test framework, which is more popular. I will first tell you what is kind of the principle for me when I look for a database unit test and the framework. One thing is that, as I mentioned, it should be very easy to set up and run.
Right.
Right. And because it's dealing with the data, I always look at if it is flexible to mock or generate test data. Okay. And of course, it has to be easy to develop, like assert logics and test logics in the test framework, and easy to debug test when there is an issue or code that the test reports error. So we can see the detailed errors coming from the test cases, and then we can go and fix our code easily. Those are kind of debugging matter. And lastly, we are talking about in terms of DevOps and CI/CD world, right? So it should be seamlessly integrated to the CI/CD pipeline that you're using. It can be Visual Studio Team Services. It can be other open source like Octopus Deploy, JetBrains, TeamCity, and those kind of stuff. So those are my category. And these two framework that I listed here, Slacker and Slacker Runner, there are others as well. But the key thing that I can tell you is that these two frameworks meet these criteria, right? And Slacker is developed by a very large software development consulting firm, software development firm. And the developers actually adopted SSDT database project-based DevOps pipeline in their core software development business for the company. And thankfully, they made it as an open source.
Yeah, that's awesome. I remember you mentioning it, and it's awesome to see them go open source. So I guess one of the big takeaways here, these two frameworks are not Microsoft frameworks, right?
It is not, yeah.
We are showing two things that are built by the community, and they're not the only two things in there. They're just two that met your criteria that you set sort of for the baseline of being very productive for the kind of tests you want to build.
Right.
Cool.
Okay. So, I told you that I only have 2 slides, so I went to the last.
We'll get to the
slide.
resources.
Right. So, okay. So let's start our demo. Ideally, whenever you have schema changes in your database, then in ideal perspective, you should have a unit test or more unit tests associated with the change. It's really tough task. Right?
Yeah. Schema changes a lot, but then especially in the beginning of the project, right?
Right. So, but if you use a SSDT database project, then you can save a ton of time because SSDT compiles database project and reports errors for all referential integrity, like your procedure is referencing a table has a foreign key relationship, all that.
Yeah, your build is already a very rich validator for the foundational things.
Yeah, those dependency issues are all detected by SSDT at the compile time and reports it. So if there's any error, then you cannot actually deploy anything to your database, right? So it's a compile time validation is one of the key features of SSDT. Then you can rely on SSDT to handle that part of the changes on your database, then now you can focus on business logics in your store procedures, functions, triggers. That is basically the main, the subject of unit testing. So you can kind of make your job more efficient in that case.
Yeah, it's funny, like when you're just talking about, let's say, C# code, you don't even think about it anymore. The build just did what the build did for the longest time. For database developers, we've all had many years of just not being there, so it's good to point out. SSDT gives you the baseline, and these frameworks lets you go off to the logic.
Exactly. So let's quickly show you what happens. So for the first part of the SSDT's validation, I just opened up the person.sql, which is the table source code for person-to-person table. One day I feel like I want to rename that table to person-to-persons, the S in it, right?
Yeah.
So if I do that.
Famous rename challenge we have as programmers.
Right. Then as soon as I change, if you notice at the bottom, it's already done. So SSDT analyze your code immediately, and then reports error. Oh, there's more than 102 errors and all that.
Right, because you didn't use any refactoring tool here. You just made one change to one SQL file.
Right.
And that just doesn't work when you have stuff referencing that.
So I'm just demonstrating one sample, but any changes like that violate those reference integrity or dependency relationship within your schema, that will be detected and then tell you, so that you can always make sure that your code change is valid. Of course, the correct way of changing it is instead of changing it directly, you can use a refactor rename functionality.
Yeah.
Then SSDT handles it. But it was just the demonstration purpose, so I just directly modified it in the code.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So let's jump into today's the demo. So in starting episode 2, I started using my demo application, which is a bunch of directory services that has like employee phone books and the org chart, the functionality that just renders the chart.
Yeah, we did some masking of the data.
That is right. So let's it's kind of the version 2 of that scenario. So I will just click the Van Miller, and we show all the detail of the Van Miller. But this one is a public application. And we are showing all the detail of employee to the public. So what we want to do is that we want to mask this information. Now it is the version 2 part. If it is used by public application user.
Right.
If internal user or internal app is using the same data, then we don't want to mask it. We want to show email, phone number, all that information without masking. So that's our goal, right? So let me go back to our solution. What I did is that I added these two users. So internal apps and public apps, as I mentioned, it has different permission sets. It has a different the usage in terms of how we show the masked data without mapping, with mapping, even though the database has the masking definition enabled. So let's do the same thing that we did in episode 2. That means go to email address the SQL, which is an email address the table, and I will. Okay, I'm running my demo on the virtual machine, so it can be a little bit slow.
Yeah, takes a few seconds.
All right. So I changed my code by to enable masked with close in my code, and let's build. Okay, it will come out all successful in a second. Okay, that's great. And let's publish it to our local development environment to run the unit test.
Let's do it.
So I already made the publish profile. What it does is that basically defines the connection string to my local machine and deploy my database project to the target unit test database and run the unit to be able to run the unit test. One thing that I added in the publish profile is SQL command variables. So what it does is that it can control the conditional deployment. If I define deployment configuration variable value as unit test, then it deploys unit test related logins and users. Right. To be able to run the unit test from the test module, we need to have a connection to SQL Server. But the login and the user for the unit test, we don't want that in production or test environment. It should just stay in the unit test environment. So that's why we can have the conditional deployment and create user login and user only for that the unit test database.
Right.
That's
yeah,
what
I mean,
we are
this
doing.
is what makes it all work, right? Giving you the flexibility to deploy when you need this parameter in a particular environment.
That is correct. So I'm
publish it.
clicking the publish button. Within a second, it'll be done. Okay, it's creating, analyzing the project and building the pack
there you
as
go.
output. It's done. So I'm gonna go through the how we enable the test. Before that, let's run the test first and then talk about that.
Sure.
Okay, I go to test menu, run all tests.
And there's
It
Test
opens up
Explorer.
the Test Explorer. It runs. Okay, there is a failure. This is expected failure. Let's click it and see what has failed in our test. So we'll make it a little bit bigger. Okay, so we had the 2 unit tests, and both failed. One is when we are running our the code, which is basically querying the email address as a public apps user, then we were expecting masked value. The result, as you see here, result was correct, but with the code change, we didn't update our test case. That was the issue. So it's a test code issue. And the second issue is about running the same test as an internal app user. We define that for internal app user, we don't want to mask our data. We want to show the data without masking.
Yeah, we show everything to internal, and public people, we want the masking. So the unit tests need to reflect that.
Right. But what you see here is that, so we were expecting the data without masking, but the returned data was masked. So the test is correct. We just detected the code issue. For our change, we didn't update necessary change to make that happen. So let me close it a little bit. So let's fix those. First one is that let's first fix the app issue. So we defined internal apps user here. And one thing that we didn't do was that, let me copy and paste. We didn't give internal apps user unmask permission. Unmask permission basically tells SQL Server not to mask, even though the column has a mask with a definition.
So it's like it's an override at the user level. So
That
this
is-
user will just not see mass data no matter where it's
Right.
defined.
So now we gave the correct permission to internal app user. One of the impact that we can think of is that without unit testing, this type of issue could have slipped through all our DevOps pipeline, and it was possible that customer detects this issue. Now, let's talk about that impact. So this AdventureWorks database is serving my demo application, but it is also serving other applications like CRMs and then your communication application within your company. So sales team as a customer, they rely on email address and the phone number
People
to
with
communicate
legitimate
and
reasons.
right, and then make a sales activities, do the sales activities. Now it's all stopped because all the email and phone number are masked, and as a salesperson now you cannot make any communication.
Yeah,
Then
your phone starts ringing at that point as a developer.
Right, it can be a huge loss in your potential sales, right?
Yeah.
So that is a real monetary value impact for this type of change. And let's look at then the sales team contact the support line, right? And support team needs to investigate where is the root cause of this issue. If they can get the developer's email and phone number, they can contact your development team, right?
Yeah.
And then when the dev team gets this fixed request, now time's ticking, potential the loss in business, and lots of pressure. Now you have to fix it. Let's assume that you fixed it like what we did.
Yeah.
How can you guarantee that your fix is not causing any more additional bug?
Yeah. Anytime you change anything related to security or
That is
masking, you get a little bit nervous as a developer. So
Right.
you
So
run tests on it if you can.
exactly. So will you have a unit test on your database or not?
Right.
Right. I chose to have a unit test on my database, so I could detect this one. only. So it matters when you detect the same issue in your pipeline. If you detect it early during your development time, then it is a much less priority than the customer detects the issue.
Yeah, the
and
cost goes
business
up
impact is happening.
exponentially. As the closer you get to your customer, the more expensive it gets to
Right.
fix the issue.
Right. So we've fixed the first one. The second one we're going to fix is that it's a test issue. Test is expecting master value. And now I'm going to show you how the test is structured.
And which test framework are we using in this particular
It's a
case?
Slacker.
The Slacker one.
Yes.
Okay.
So if you take a look at my solution, there are two projects. One is a database unit test and the test specs. I will look at the test spec project first. This one is a Slacker project.
Is it just a regular C# assembly project, or what kind of project type is it? What is it trying to build here? Because there's no code in it, right? Well, there's no C# code. It's just SQL code. Right. But VS is rendering it as a
That's a good
C#
question.
icon.
That's a good question. So Slacker is written in Ruby and R spec. To be able to put it in our solution, we just need to have a placeholder. So I used the C# empty project as a placeholder, and I marked it as a do not build, and it's just hold that in a structure. That's basically what it is.
Okay.
Okay, and then I added Slacker project's structure in that the C# empty project. Right. That is basically what I did.
So you're basically impacting the file system more than the C#.
That is right. That is right. In that case, I can check in all this as part of my solution, and then it travels along with the rest of my database and application code, and then they can go through a CI/CD pipeline altogether. That is basically the reason that I did it.
Right.
Okay. So as I mentioned, the Slacker is written in the Ruby. In terms of a learning curve, I mentioned that it should be very easy to start and use it, right? And I never used the Ruby language before I tested Slacker and the building this demo and stuff. But I could learn Ruby for Slacker usage within a day, and I could start producing my own test specs in there. In the Ruby R spec term, the things that we call as test class and test case is called the test spec. Okay? And then in the spec folder, each of those R spec Ruby files contains that. So in my application, I use get direct manager and get direct report store procedures. I created unit test for each of those. It is very simple. So each spec can contain multiple test methods. In the Ruby term, our spec term, it's examples. Okay? And I can have a single or multiple. It's very simple. I will highlight it. So each method or example runs when you run the spec during the run all test type of action. We'll go through each spec and then run methods. So what I did,
just running kind of vertically, the first one, second one.
That is right. It's sequentially just run those.
Okay.
So the key thing is that, as I mentioned, I need to be able to mock or generate the unit test data. You're not going to test unit test cases against your production size of database, 4 terabytes of database. So usually what you need is that for the unit testing, you can have lookup tables and reference data. And for user data, you can just start with empty. And for your logic testing, you should be able to quickly generate mock data for your unit testing. Right? So that is one. So I have created a function because I'm going to add the mock data repeatedly across my test cases. I just made it as a function. I will go to
makes sense.
that one.
You make it generic across all the tests, and then the test within the expect below is just the individual test you're actually doing.
Right. So I insert those mock data, and then I call expect function. What it does is it calls this file, SQL.AdventureWorks exec human resources get direct report. It's not something special. It's just a SQL statement. It's a file that has your SQL statements that is basically calling your store procedure with variable ID. And then once it is executed, then it matches with your expected value in CSV file. If it matches, then your test fails. If it doesn't match, then the test fails. So all these utility functions like matching, being able to load the values, the CSV values into your table, and being able to generate even those CSV data during the runtime so that you can provide the key values, but the rest of the value that you don't really care about your testing, you can the Slacker can generate those data automatically for you. So it's a very powerful framework in my perspective.
Yeah, gives you all the foundational things you need to be able to do these sort of tests.
Right. So let's quickly look at the SQL file. So it's a SQL statement. Only difference is this passing the parameter value. That's it. Rest of them is the simple. So this is my main logic for application to generate org chart structure, hierarchical structure, and it runs. Then last piece that I want to show you is the data part. So I have a seed data and the expected result data. I will make it bigger. You can separate out the data, the mock data part from your test logic. So you can manage your mock data separately from the test logic development. So what I have is all the CSV files. These contains like one or two rows that I really need to unit test my store procedure and functions.
Yes, the minimum viable amount of data.
Right, and it's very flexible to define it in the CSV and then use it. And the expected result is it is the values that you want to compare, match after you run your SQL statements, and the result should match with this one. So you can define all those in CSV file, and you can also source control this together. Right? So that's the value of having this one. Okay, so let's get back to our main business of fixing the code. So it was defined in Xkit as user spec. And as we mentioned, what we are expecting is that instead of expecting the email in clear data format, we want to have it masked, right? So this is the correct one. I just added it for demo purpose. So I can fix my test.
Right. So
this is the correct
the
one.
broken test is now the expected test.
Right. So for public user, it should expect the masked value. For internal apps, it shouldn't be masked.
Yeah, it should be the real value.
Right. So that's the change. And let me run the test one more time. And run all tests.
This is, the kind of like the user is a great example because the user could just be right in your machine, or the configuration, the granted permissions could just be right in your local dev box.
Right.
It's something that I could easily see myself overlooking when you move environments. So having this in multiple environments, especially when you get to the cleaner like UAT, where you have hopefully a lot less sort of chaos going on.
Right.
And you can run this, make sure things are still good.
Oh, we forgot the one step. So we made the code fix in internal apps, right? And
redeploy, of course.
Yeah, we need to build it.
I was thinking we should do that, and then
Why didn't you tell me?
You got me too excited about the other things we were looking at.
Okay, it should be done by now. Okay, it's done.
Yeah.
So let's publish one more time.
But our unit test still proved useful, right?
That's right.
It is still giving
told
us. Yeah, it is testing our testing.
All right. Okay, great. So in a few seconds, it will be done. Okay, it's done. So let me run the unit test one more time. All right, it's passed.
Awesome.
So now we are ready to check in, right? Let's check in. And let me name it as a channel 9 demo. Changes. And I'll commit. Okay, it's committed. And here down below, I will show you. We'll push it to our repository. Here, push. Okay, it'll be done. Great, so it's checked in. So let's go and check our builds. So now we see 2 builds kicked off because of our change that we just made. The first one is what we already had in episode 2. The second one, SQL tools unit test CI dev, which is the new build definition that I added. So let's go and check it out. So if you see, there is a database unit test step added in our build definition to have a gated build. While it's running, let's take a look at the history of our builds. Okay. So if you take a look at out of the history, there was a failed one. Okay. If I click, then the good thing is that Visual Studio Team Services with the Slack runner integration, it shows all the test results in the same build dashboard. So whenever there's a build failure, you can always go and check what has failed. Clicking the reports will show you exactly what has failed. So you have a full history of your CI build. If any test fails, then your entire build instance will fail. That means you're not going to have a build out. Then it doesn't, the CI/CD pipeline stops at that level, so we can gate it.
Yeah,
right?
and it's the same amount of information you got in Visual Studio in the Task Explorer, right? So you have the full fidelity of the info being available.
That is correct.
Yeah, very cool.
Okay, let's go back to our build. It's all done. So let me quickly show you what I have changed in the build definition. So it's all the same, except the database unit test.
Yeah, when we say the same, we mean like to the previous one.
From the episode 2. So if you want to kind of correctly follow up, I suggest watch the episode 1, 2, and the 3. If you have already done that, then it'll be easy to just follow up.
I can't help but think of Star Wars every time we talk about episode 1 and 2. The marketing has worked. I'm converted, but yes, we're not talking about anything made by Disney here.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Yeah.
So I made a little bit of a change in the build task. Instead of just building it, I also added publish. Okay, I will make it big. What I want to do is that as a part of CI build process, after build is successful, then I want to publish it to a unit test environment, which right now is the same environment as a build agent.
Sure.
Okay.
So you're publishing your T-SQL, all the changes that they're built successfully. So the build, first part is the build, right? That's the basic validation we're talking about. And now this is the second part. In order to run the tests, we need to have something to run it against with some data, with some structure to it.
Yes. And then one more parameter property that I added is a SQL publish profile path. In the Visual Studio, we added the publish profile for unit test use. And we just defined it here because we are defining the server instance as localhost. Wherever it goes, it runs on the same box. So in this case, we have installed the SQL Server on the build agent, and it runs there. Even though it is a enterprise, my production is running on Azure or enterprise edition of a SQL Server instance. On the build agent, you can use Express or developer. As a part of a SQL Server 2016 SP1, the great feature expansion was we expanded all the programmability surface area. So all those, most of those enterprise edition level of feature is also available in the Express and all the way up.
Yeah, that's the change that folks might have missed potentially, right? But we're excited. It was one of my fun projects. So
So on the build agent, you don't have to run the enterprise edition to test the enterprise version of a SQL instance. Okay, so you have flexibility. On the test side, I didn't change anything. What I did was just click Add Test, and there's a test category. And if you go all the way down, there's a Visual Studio test. Because our solution has a Slacker test and then a Slacker runner. I'm going to show you in a second. Visual Studio test automatically picks up our test project and run it as a part of this task definition.
Okay, so you just hit add and you didn't customize it besides the name?
No.
Okay.
So that's basically what happened.
Okay.
And then for that matter, I will quickly show you our project one more time, and then database unit test project. It is the same as Visual Studio C# test project. And after you create, let me show you, you go to Add, New Project, and it's the same as this one. Okay, unit
so
test
just
the project.
default unit test project. And then I see over there in the references, over in Solution Explorer, I mean,
Right.
you added a Slacker runner.
Right. So it is a NuGet package. You can easily install this NuGet package from NuGet installer, Slacker runner, and XUnit. These are what you can get from the NuGet package. I have a setup guide that I published in my GitHub public project. So I have a reference to do that. You can just follow the step by step, and you can have the same thing. But there is no additional coding that you need. You just add a NuGet package, and the test case, which is a Visual Studio test framework test case. What you can do is this is like a template. So you can copy paste the same code and then put it in the test spec.cs. Then it will pick up all the specs that you have defined in Slacker project as a specs, and then just to run it in sequential.
Right, so you're making it very generic, and this just enables the magic glue to get everything working together.
For people who have been using the Visual Studio test project, test framework a long time, you can do all other magics, right? Instead of running all, you can run it individually, and you can do. But you can apply the same the technique here. Just for the demo, I just made it really simple and the template level to pick up all the specs and run it. All right, so let's check our application. So now our change is again deployed to our unit test environment, the user acceptance test environment, so that now we can do the functional testing on that one and the user acceptance test.
Cool. Yeah, it's very cool.
Okay, so that was the demo that I wanted to show you. So the key thing is that using the unit test, you could detect, test the code and your real code issue in the database, so that before it slips through the all the way to the production, and then they're getting the customer reported issue with the heavy pressure to fix it and validate it. So there is a value that you can apply the database unit test in the perspective. I will go to the references. I have listed all the references about the technologies that we used, and then the tutorials that we went through. So for Slacker and Slacker Runner, you can go to GitHub project. Both are open source, and then you can learn from here. And if you're interested in T-SQL-T, T-SQL-T has its own homepage, and it's open source, but it also have a lot of community contributions. So it's
it's been around longer from what I can.
It's longer than the Slacker. And for episode 1, our SSDT DevOps episode 1 and episode 2, there's a link. And if you want to try the same project, the AdventureWorks directory service, and run the same Slacker test on your own environment, then I made it 2 projects in my GitHub account. So you can go to these 2 GitHub projects and clone it and simply run it and see what's in there.
Awesome.
Yeah. So if you have any question, then you can send me an email to eric@microsoft.com, or you can follow us, SQL Data Tools, on Twitter. So that's basically what we offer.
Awesome. Well, I hope folks out there enjoyed this episode. I think we covered a lot. I think the test frameworks are really cool to see, the community investing into the SQL space for us, and us having such great integration. I mean, this, I'm sure would have taken me some time to learn, but it doesn't seem like it's way more than something you can learn. It's a days of work, and then hopefully your project benefits for years to come.
Right.
Right.
So if you're a developer, as a developer, as a PM, I could learn it in 1 day.
As a developer,
it could be maybe 10 minutes.
Yeah, maybe 10 minutes. All right, Eric. Well, thank you so much, and I'm sure we'll have you on again for other topics, but thank you for being on. It was great to have you.
Thank you, Dimitri.
And thank you, folks, for watching. We'll be back next time on Visual Studio Toolbox. Have a good one.